In this video, we'll talk about ratios, kind of what they are, how they relate to fractions, and how to write them. So let's talk first about what a ratio is. A ratio is simply just a comparison of two values. And it's worth noting here, ratios are all about meaning. And this is where they differ from fractions. So, just worth noting. We'll go through a couple of examples to kind of iterate this point. So let's talk about this. Let's say we have two red markers for every blue piece of paper. Well, we can write this a couple different ways. We can write it as two red markers with the word two in between, to one blue paper. We could also write it, instead of using the word two, we could write it with a colon. 2 to 1 is how we'd read it. Or sometimes it can also be written to where it looks kind of like a fraction. And just be careful, this isn't just two, it's two red markers for each blue piece of paper. They're all about meaning, and just keep that in the back of your mind anytime you're dealing with ratios. So, like, for instance, we could also say that there are 4 red markers for 2 pieces of blue paper. Now, equivalent, or those fractions are equivalent, but it would be a little bit different than with the fraction sense. Now, if I was to add 2 of those, so like, for instance, just off to the side here is a total opposite thought. If we were to add 2 over 1 plus 2 over 1, well, that would be 4 over 1. However, if we did this with, okay, let's say I have 2 sets of red markers and a blue piece of paper and 2 red markers and a blue piece of paper. If I add all those together, then I would have 4 red markers and 2 blue pieces of paper. It's a little bit different, so just keep that in mind. It's a little different than fractions, although in a lot of senses they are similar. Now, just one more example to kind of drive the point home. We could be talking about miles per hour. So let's say I travel 7 miles in 3 hours. Well, we can write this simply as 7 to 3, well, miles to hours, I suppose would be worth noting there. Yeah, the units are very much important. We can also write this 7 miles using a colon to 3 hours. And likewise, we can use a fraction. Now, a lot of times, a lot of textbooks won't use the units. They'll just write the ratio. When we're talking about ratios, I personally like to use the units. It reminds me that, again, we have that meaning. We're talking about 2 different values. We're talking about comparing 2 different units, usually. So just keep that in mind when you're dealing with ratios.